Alright, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Safely Extreme Cast. This is for the week of August 22nd, 2021. We are on time for the first time, as Shark posted in his chat. And welcome from Nexus Games, or soon to be another name, Sharky.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here on time. My streams are normally on time, but everyone that I shared with Josh has always been very, very late, except for this one.
We'll see if we get more people or less people this week. If we don't get any people, then we just pick a random time next week, and that's when we'll do it. We won't tell anyone.
I think we've already got more people because, you've got two chatters over
there. But we have a very great cast lined up this week. This is going to be kind of part two from last week, as we're trying to do topics related to how to best succeed and survive in the game industry. Last week we discussed about how to read the game market and some of the elements in that, and we're going to continue this kind of thought process for this week, discussing kind of what are the not so secrets that developers need to understand if they want to best succeed as an indie.
Yeah, and it's also good to mention that this is the second part of this series kind of thing, and this will not be the last part. There will be, at the minimum, one more, but probably at least two more, but possibly three more. We don't know, but we'll find that out depending on how long we go on this one.
We're still going to try to keep things to about maybe 60 to 75 minutes, give or take. But it all depends on how quickly we move through our topics for this week.
And we're not trying to do a speed run or anything on this, so we're trying to give everything its due diligence, but we're also not trying to go in high detail on everything, because this is a overview, not a detailed thing of each one of these, because a detailed thing of each one of these would each be a 1 to 2 hour cast on their own, and we've already technically covered some of them, a lot of them. But this is a overview of everything you need to do to have a chance, a decent chance, rather, at succeeding.
Yep.
You can succeed without doing any of these things and doing the complete wrong things, but, you have to, that's the equivalent of going out and getting struck by lightning 3 times, getting to the lottery, buying a lotto ticket, getting struck by lightning 3 times on the way home, getting home, find out that you win the lottery, and you have a successful game. But if you follow this list, maybe you'll have I don't know, a 10% chance of succeeding if you follow this list. This is not a guaranteed if you follow this list, you'll succeed.
Yeah, you need to streamline the struck by lightning exam, because you've said it so many times.
Yeah, dude.
But like Shark said, we've seen developers who have succeeded doing everything that we're going to talk about, and we've seen some who have not. But the important thing is that what we're discussing is about mitigating the risk factor when it comes to game development. Because there's a lot of things that can go wrong, just as there's a lot of things that can go right that can help your game succeed. And what we're going to do is we're going to start kind of with where we ended last week's show. And that is being able to understand why a game succeeded or failed. This is one of the hardest lessons I feel a lot of people have to learn. Not just when it comes to being a developer, but YouTubers and streamers, and especially the quote-unquote game journalists. This is one of those spots I think a lot of people struggle with, because of the fact that everyone likes the underdog story. Everyone likes to hear about the game that through 5 to 10 years of brutal grinding and development, the game comes out, sells 500 million copies, everyone's a millionaire, we save the orphanage, it's a happy ending. But most development doesn't work like that, even the ones that do succeed. And why it's so important to be able to understand why a game succeeded and failed is that this is how you start to build your knowledge base of what is good and bad design. Because
Right.
one
And
thing,
before we hop into that in complete depth, let's point some other things we're going to be talking about in this show. We're also going to be talking about how to discover what is assess and fail points. You
mm-hmm,
know, the order of events of what you need to do in the development, the monetization methods, and all kinds of other stuff that goes into that. Also, like the art of a game, why
mm-hmm.
marketing matters, the branding of your company, and why store pages are so critical. But let's now that we've got that out of the way, let's hop in fully into the topic
Mm-hmm.
of understanding why a game succeeded and why it failed.
Mm-hmm. And one of the reasons why you have to understand, like I said, is building up that foundational support or foundational knowledge. Because if all you do is play the very best games or you don't accept feedback or anything along those lines, you're not going to understand these pitfalls. And it's very easy, especially for people who cover video games or just play nothing but the best games, to just become blindsided by anything else. If all you do is play Mario, well, how are you going to understand what makes a bad platformer or a game where the platforming doesn't feel right? If all you do is play Doom or play Call of Duty, that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand FPS design. I've said this plenty of times before. Playing lots of video games and analyzing lots of video games are two different skill sets. And while people who are in the esports or speedrunning categories, they're probably the closest that non developers have to understanding game design, it's still not really hitting that same target what we're talking about. And
Yeah.
far too many people, especially first time indie developers, or even those who come from game journalism or another medium into the game industry, tend to not understand again why a game ended up doing badly.
Yeah. And you know, there's 2 points here. Understanding why stuff failed and how you find what caused it.
Mm-hmm.
And how you find out what caused it, the easiest way to do that is by playing the game, find out what will actually work. Hello, Smellback, welcome. It's it's the first time we've ever been on time, so that may be the reason. But discovering that time is or the discovering the how it happened, what it is very, very hard, because until you get your mind into the right state.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get your mind into the right state, you cannot stop it from happening. It
Mm-hmm.
will, everything you play will be popping up numbers, calculations, all this other stuff, formulas, all this kind of stuff up in your head. And you'll see, okay, this works because this is, colliding
Mm-hmm.
here, this is colliding here. And when my character walks off this platform, even after it walks off the platform, I still have this dead period where I can still technically jump in midair, kind of, opposite of Wile E. Coyote,
Yeah.
because, well, sort of exactly like that and sort of off of it, because he walks out and gravity doesn't take effect until he looks down, kind of thing. It's like that, but you don't look down yet because you're not far enough off of it. And, you realize this stuff, and you're able to, and you can't stop seeing that once you truly adjust your mind to it. You can't stop seeing it.
Mm-hmm. But it all conversely means that until you start doing that, you're not really studying design. I've been playing video games for now like 34, 33 years of my life, but a lot of that was just me playing games. It wasn't really until like 2010, 2012 that I started to look more into design. And this is again one of the points. That's my garage door opening. One of the points that we've said is that just because you play a lot of video games or you cover a lot of video games, that doesn't mean you understand design. Like, I was a part of a press event a few days ago, and they were asking for like questions for an indie developer showing off their game. I was with, I think, other game journalists, and like nobody was really asking any questions about the design of the game. I was literally the only person who said, "So how do you beat this game?" Because I think that's a very important question to ask a developer. How do you even finish your own game? And I always do wonder just what is the actual knowledge base when it comes to people who cover video games, and even by extension to the people who design them. Because another major point that needs to be said that we've discussed is that game design is not magic. No matter how much BioWare, Nintendo, and so on, have their secret sauce, or they used to have their secret sauce in some cases.
Or BioWare magic.
Mm-hmm. Game design is about foundational elements. It's about understanding what makes a game feel good to play, and that is where we could easily, jump into a 5-hour talk about UI UX. But
I just have to point this out. Pony posted Illuminati noises, and then you said that's your garage. So Josh's garage is 100% confirmed Illuminati.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But for developers trying to understand why games succeeded or failed, this is the reason why you need to play bad games. Because when you see those pain points and you experience them, you know not to put them in your game. If all you do is play the latest Nintendo game or the latest BioWare game or whatever, you're not seeing the things that they caught. And more often than not, you're going to fall into those traps because you didn't know they existed. And I've played so many platformers that the jumping is horrible. And again, if your jumping is bad, nothing else really is going to matter in your platformer.
What if it's just a brand new genre where you jump from platform to platform?
Mm-hmm. Or an RPG where you attack from left to right.
Well, it wouldn't be an RPG. It'd just be a game where you attack from left to right and, turn-based with, 3 people on each side. Right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a brand new genre, never been tried before.
Yep,
But the discovering those points, you've got to attune your mind to it to be able to discover those. Figure out why something happened and how. Why do we have iframes in games? It's like you look at that and you're like, well, duh, because like if you get hit by one character and that sends you, and there's knockback kind of thing, and that sends you into something else, within like a second, less than a second, like 0.1 seconds, and the player has no control over. And over on that side, there's 5,000 things punching at once, and then they each take away 1 HP, and you only have 100 HP, and then it's instant death, and the player had no control over it because just one attack just was basically became an instant kill. It basically became a one-punch man, and that feels really, really, really bad. Yeah. And game designers that attune themselves to this, back in the day before there was any attunement or before there was any video games, they manually learned this stuff through testers and feedback and everything. And that's why they created iframes, So now we have to, when you study game design, you have to study the games and figure out what the original game creators created in order, based off of testers kind of thing. And you probably want to implement that yourself. You don't want to break conventions on a lot of this stuff. But
unless you really know what you're doing. Like,
Yeah,
unless you are, an expert in that genre, you can't be reinventing the wheel if you don't know what that wheel is.
yeah. So you have to really, like you have to understand that and see that. And once you can see that and actively see that all, realistically, then you won't be able to stop seeing it. And
Mm-hmm.
once you can't stop seeing it, then discovering the success and failure points of a game becomes very, very easy. Now, then pinpointing which ones are success points and which ones are failure points is also fairly easy, because like
Mm-hmm.
seeing because you see all the points at that point, and at that point you're looking at it. Did this have a negative effect or did it have a positive effect? Well, it had a positive effect. Okay, this is why it succeeded. It had a negative effect. Okay, this is why it failed.
Mm-hmm.
And you then look at all the other systems that are tying into it and see if any system is tied to that one system that failed, and see if it's a failure because the systems that are tied to it, or if it's a failure because it failed and spread stuff out, kind of thing. Because every system in a game is linked through a lattice or a spider web or whatever you want to think about it. So one system failing can cause other systems to fail, including if they're not bad systems. So you have
Mm-hmm.
to analyze that, and then you also need to find out how much of a failure was it? Was it like point 0.1, but they ran into it 5 billion times? Was it point 0.1, but they only ran into it like twice? Was it like, 100, but they only ran into it once? I mean, what's the
Mm-hmm.
exact amount of failure? How bad did that make the player feel, as well as how many times did the player encounter it? When you're talking about UI, UX stuff, often with that stuff, players encounter it a lot. So
Mm-hmm.
even like a 0.1% bad failure rate can be horrific in
If
that
it,
context. But
yeah,
if it's a 0.1 failure rate and something somebody only encounters like a one time, that's probably it's nothing to worry about, really.
yeah. But this is also why when I play a lot of games that the UI UX is so hammered home to me because I can spot that stuff within 15 minutes, maybe even 5 minutes of playing a game because they're often that prevalent. And if something is annoying you in 30 seconds of starting up a game, chances are you're going to be experiencing it a lot. And if you keep experiencing it a lot, it's going to start to wear on you. And the only way you're going to spot, or there's only two ways you're going to spot UI UX issues. One is to study games, and the other is to do playtesting. And playtesting will probably be our next point, but there's a few more things I want to discuss here really fast. That when you study other games, this is again one of those things I see a lot of developers, or especially when I see developers try to give advice, often slip up on. That a common thing that I see people love to say is don't play video games, go outside, study history, watch movies, read books. This will give you knowledge on how to build an amazing game. They're only a quarter right. This will give you great concepts for games, but the only way you're going to be able to actually learn how to build a game and how to build a great game is you have to play them. And we're not saying you need to 100% every game of the genre you want to build, but you should be able to answer three questions: what's good, what's bad, and what is either keeping people playing or what is stopping them from playing. Because if you can't understand what a game does right or wrong, no amount of story, no amount of outside knowledge is going to give you that information.
Yeah. And I do want to bring up a point here. Josh said playing them is how you have to do it. And to get 100% read on things, absolutely, you have to play it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're extremely skilled at reading game design and whatnot, and this is only if you're in the top, I don't know, whatever percentage, top 1% or whatever, maybe top 3%, I don't know. But when you're in the top percent, you can watch people play games and absorb, I don't know, like 85, 90% of the same information. You're still not going to get 100%, but
Mm-hmm.
you will get a lot of knowledge from it. But when you're at a lower tier kind of thing, you may get absolutely nothing from it or next to little. So do not base yourself on that. I would definitely encourage you, if you're going to watch videos, you in your spare time, you definitely try to see it in there too as much as possible, but do not depend on that. I realize that everybody does not have money to buy every game in the world,
Mm-hmm.
but like, if you can understand a certain percentage, even a 10% in your off time kind of thing, and then a lot of percentage when you're actually playing it, then you can, it just can only help you more, but
Mm-hmm.
do not depend on solely video, because if you depend on solely video, there's going to be points that could never been realized through there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you put the control to jump on the start button on the controller, then
Or
you're not going to be able to tell that through the video. There's no way to tell that how bad the controls are through the video. You
mm-hmm.
can see how bad the person's playing it, but that's just their ability to adapt to that bad control scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And people have various levels of adaptability to that. So, like, it could be a high level, it could be a low level. So you will see effects from it, but it'll be like, just get good.
Yeah, you'll never be able to spot when it comes to action-based games how the controller or how the controls feel in somebody's hands through video. That it's
Or
just
even turn based.
I think turn-based you can at least understand the systems, but
Yeah, but you still can't understand the controls.
hmm and that's why you need to be able to play these games. And you want, again, a broad spectrum of games. You want to look at the very best, you want to look at the very worst, and you want to look at the games that were very much maybe hidden gems. The ones that maybe got 60 to 70% on Metacritic. The games that they have their hardcore fans, but something didn't click right. And those are the big points you want to understand as a developer. Why did a game that maybe did 8 out of 10 things right failed? What was those two things they did so wrong that it stopped and just killed the momentum? Because if it killed their game, it's going to kill your game probably.
Yep, more than likely. And if it's not going to kill your game, it's certainly going to do a lot of damage to it.
Mm-hmm. And I think with that, are you ready to move on and talk more about playtesting?
Yeah, although we probably should start with the core gameplay loop and then go into
Okay,
playtesting.
yeah. So, from this point, or from talking about studying a design, the next thing you need to do is you need to build your core gameplay loop. Because this is the nuts and bolts, the skeletal system of your game. If you don't have a good core gameplay loop, nothing else that you will ever do is going to make your game work. And this is true even if your game is narrative focused. Because we've played many narrative driven games that are just horrible to play. And these games will often have very high churn. The people who get through those pain points, they're going to see the game all the way through to the end. But if you lose 60-70% of everyone playing your game before that point, it doesn't matter what your story is.
Yeah, and I want to point out that the current segment we're on is the order of events for success, and
Mm-hmm.
getting the core gameplay loop is order number one. You start with that. You have to get your core gameplay loop solid. And how do you get it solid? Well, you got to test. You got to test. And,
Mm-hmm.
this will be when your game is at the brokenest, buggiest, and most incomplete. And it's going to be the hardest time to get anybody to test your game because nobody wants to play the game in that state. So it's going to be very hard, but you're going to have to do it. You're going to have to find these people and you're going to have a long search for them. Now,
Mm-hmm.
you don't have to have 10 billion people testing it. If you can get 10 billion people testing it, do. I think that's more people than what's on the earth. But, even as few as 3 or 4 people can yield tremendous results.
Mm-hmm.
But the more, the better,
Yeah.
and keep in mind that these people cannot be friends or family. You can also have friends and family do it separately, but they are not part of your tester group.
Yeah.
They are part of your friends and family group. Your
Mm-hmm.
tester group is, people who are either perfect strangers, acquaintances, or just discovered you,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, or vaguely familiar with you. They may be members of your Discord, or a Discord that you're in,
Yeah. And
and it's just not people. The aim is to get people who are not biased towards you. You want
mm-hmm.
people to tell you your shit sucks, fix it.
Yeah. And this is also why talking to other developers is not going to help you in this point. Because developers don't like to tell other developers that their game is bad.
Well,
Every
some developers. I mean, like it depends on what crowd of developers you're hanging
yeah.
out with. If you're
But
if you're in one of those crowds where
mhm,
everybody has to offer, positive, feedback and everything, absolutely ignore all those developers. Now
yeah.
then, with my original testers, I had several rookie developers in there.
Hmm.
And they were really good at finding and pointing out issues because they were not afraid to give feedback.
Yeah.
Heart, good feedback. And the thing is you have to make sure that you breed an environment that is able to encourages people to actually be honest with you. Don't be like, the exact opposite thing you want to do is when somebody says this part of your game sucks or I don't like this part, you be like, you yell at them or
Mm.
anything negative kind of thing. Do not take it negatively. It is so easy to do, but once you start doing that, you're going to be shutting off that valve of feedback, and it's like shutting off the valve of water. And
Hmm.
once you run out, you're in deep shit. You're even in deep shit when it's not going full steam.
Hmm.
You just become farther and farther, deeper and deeper into it as you cut it off, and you don't want to cut it off. So definitely encourage that negative, good critical feedback.
Hmm. And this is again very important at the core gameplay loop stage because if people hate your game when there's no graphics to it, most likely they're going to hate your gameplay even if you have the best graphics. Or if you spent the last 5 years, mastering Unreal and you now have photorealistic effects in your game. Conversely, if people enjoy your game and it's just, very basic pixel art or, blocks moving along the screen, then you certainly have a good step or a good place to build on. And this is often why a lot of people like to do game jams as a way of kind of test bedding these ideas. If an idea, came home, third or better in a game jam, maybe there's something there to it. If it came in last place, maybe not spend the next 5 years on that idea.
But just because it came in, you know, 1400 doesn't mean you don't have a good idea. It just means that you didn't find what you need to find in there. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so like it can it can serve as a good test bed, but it can also serve as a bad test bed because because I mean part of the placement is different things that wouldn't even matter in the final game.
Mm-hmm.
So because it's rushed. Like your game could be a buggy mess because you didn't have enough time to not make it a buggy mess, and you could have the most awesome gameplay ever, and you got really low in score because all the bugs.
Mm-hmm.
And Rastel's point will come up as two topics. Well, no, it's the next topic after this
Mm-hmm.
about graphics cell game.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that when we get to that part. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, we're still on the order of events.
Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to figure out what your core gameplay loop is, this again builds back or builds up from the fact that you need to be able to understand what a game did right and what it did wrong. Because the core gameplay loop, this is 3 to 5 minutes of experiencing a game. Like, we're not talking about your core gameplay loop is 5 hours of gameplay or 5 seconds. It's something that people are going to be repeating pretty much consistently through your game. If they're not directly interacting with your core gameplay loop, they should be quickly getting back to it. And when we see developers who fail at this level, it's oftentimes very easy to point that out. But
Mm-hmm.
conversely, the games that have really solid core gameplay loops, it's, I think, very hard if you don't study design to understand why they worked. Why is, it's so great to play a Super Mario level? Why does, doing a run in the Biome of Isaac or Hades feel so rewarding? These are elements that, again, they occur so rapidly that if you don't properly understand design, it's just going to kind of like fly over your head. And I've played a few games lately, such as that Garden Story, Galactic Mining Core, and even something like Shapes.io. And Shapes.io is a really good example of this. Its whole core gameplay loop is basically just take the optimization of Factorio, remove everything else surrounding it, and we're going to build a game around it. And guess what? It did really damn well. Because the developer understood what is the core gameplay loop of a game like Factorio or Dyson Sphere, and they said to themselves, okay, let's make that, but we're going to do it in a way that's not going, step on the toes of those games. And they just, I think, announced that the game has sold, I think, over 1 million copies. So they did something right by their understanding of that design.
Nice. And it looks like your chat is going to talk about the next topic all before we get to it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then, also the important thing about the solid gameplay loop and the testing, you need this stuff as early as possible.
Mm-hmm.
This should be goal number one. Get us your core gameplay loop, get testers, and get it solid, and then you can move on to other things. Don't worry about aesthetics. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about sound. Don't worry about this other mechanic that ties into it. Don't worry about any of that until the core gameplay loop is solid through testing.
Yep, and if it's not,
Mm.
you have to get it out there. You have to fix that issue before you move on. It's often why a lot of developers will spend a long time in the pre-planning and early stages of development trying to figure out what they want their game to be. Because if you can't answer that question, you don't have a video game. You just have a bunch of weird ideas you're throwing against the wall and hoping one of them will earn you $10 million. This is what we saw with BioWare, with Anthem, and they spend, what, like 5 to 6 years trying to figure out what their core gameplay loop was. And
Mm-hmm.
no, you should not be, it should not be going into the years in terms of your core gameplay. And
Yep.
another point I want to mention, Again, even if your game is narrative driven, even if it's supposed to be, wholesome or relaxing or casual or any other, buzzword that you would like to think, if the core gameplay loop doesn't work for one reason or another, all that wholesomeness, all that, trying to make a relaxing game is going to blow up in your face. I talked about that game East Shade like a few weeks ago, a few months ago. That it's a game that I'm looking at the achievement page for right now. It goes from 94% who literally just start the tutorial to 17% in terms of the very next achievement. And the very next achievement occurs within an hour of playing it. So they lost almost 80% of their fan base within probably less than 30 to 40 minutes of playing. And if a game loses that much of its people within that span of time, that is a massive red flag that something went wrong. And if you can't study design, you can't get your core gameplay loop right, that's often when that happens. That you could have an amazing concept. You could have a game that builds a very hardcore fan base, but if only 5 to 10% of the people who bought your game are actually experiencing it, you don't really have a good foundation to go forward.
Yeah. Rusto in chat says you can't deny Candy Raid had great aesthetics. I would say commercially, it had very, very low end, very barely passable aesthetics. That said, commercially has such insanely high standards. Now, if you were to throw the commercially standards out of it, then yeah, it looked really dang good. But when you have the commercial as requirement in there, that was very much bottom tier. Wouldn't you agree, Josh?
Well, I don't know if I would say bottom tier because I've seen worse pixel art. I have
I'm not
certainly.
talking about worst pixel art. I'm talking about worst, commercially viable. I'm talking about commercially viable
Hmm,
pixel art.
I would say it hits the retro vibe. I think it did that really well, but retro is very hard to stand out in these days because
Yeah,
there's
you have to
so
be
many of them.
so high on that. You have to be. That's the reason why I was saying that he was on that bottom rung of that retro, because you just have to go so above and beyond to actually be good in the commercial market. Like when you're just talking about retro, he absolutely nailed it.
Hmm.
It was looked really good. But when you're talking about the commercial market and how hard the commercial market is, like his was just at the bottom because there was so many tons more standing out way above his. And that's a cruel factor of this market. I am being cruel because that's what the market is, and I'm telling you what the market is.
Like,
I'm not being cruel for the sake of being cruel. I'm just telling you the way the things are. And the thing is the art was definitely good. It just was not to the level that it would stand out on its own on a store page and be like, yes, I've got to own that game because it's absolutely beautiful.
and the market
And
has shifted, I think, a lot in terms of the quote unquote modern retro scene. Was there are a lot of modern retro games that we've played that even if they have stronger pixel art, it still is not enough to get people to play those games. It's very similar in the same effect as the adventure genre, that it's so, you know, baked in at this point that it's going to attract people, but it's not going to attract anyone new. And for the people that are already in it, you got hit out of the park in order to get them interested in your game.
yeah, just what do they call it in baseball where you make
Home
it
run.
through all four bases, but you don't actually hit a home run? It doesn't go out of the park. I forget what it is, but if you do that in today's market with your art, you're at the bottom tier. You're at the bottom tier. You barely made it across all the bases. And in today's market, you not only need to, with your art aesthetics, you need to hit it out of the park. It's got to go way beyond that. It needs to, go like superhero style to the space,
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, we're hitting on the next topic rather than the current one.
Yeah.
So, maybe we start to the next phase of this and talk about the starting your market plans early, because this is also part of this order of events. You want to start your marketing the second bit, well, not the second you start, but the second you get your core gameplay loop down, you want to start your marketing plans.
Mm-hmm.
And your marketing plans are, your marketing, you want to actually initiate your marketing like in the last 6 months, 3 months, probably not 3 months, probably no less than 4 months, but maybe even a year before release, depending on if you have enough content for that, which you probably don't. So probably 6 months to 4 months range, and that's when you want to kick it in. But you want to start the planning from that, from basically the instant you have your core gameplay loop down, because you want to start figuring out who's going to play this game, what are they going to like, what art are we going to apply to this, because art is part of your marketing plans. Because you need the art aesthetic to fit, to be at least good for your target audience that's going to like this game. And you need to figure out who your target audience is. You need to figure out all these things, plan out all these things, start, thinking about a trailer. How can you show off this game in the best light? You start thinking this, you have all the gears turning and everything, and you nail stuff down one at a time. But it's probably starting with your art aesthetics, but you have to start your marketing plans right after you start your core gameplay loop, while you actually start your you don't actually start your marketing campaign until the last bit of development.
And another point is that if you're trying to build like a free to play or any kind of monetization kind of focused design, you need to figure that stuff out very early in development, because the monetization in this aspect is going to affect your design and vice versa. And you don't want to be building, let's say, a one-time pay commercial game, and then 80% of the way through say, oh, let's just turn into a free-to-play game. Or conversely, build a free-to-play monetization-heavy game and then say, okay, let's just make it retail. We just flip a switch and everything's going to work.
Yeah, whenever you do not decide your monetization method at the very beginning, this would be after the core gameplay loop, kind of thing. But once you get the core gameplay loop, you need to decide that monetization model, because when you don't decide it soon enough, what happens is it ends up being tacked on at the end. And when it's 80%, 70%, 50% done, and you put it in at that point, the problem is all your systems that are tying to the monetization, whether it's a one-time purchase or not, all those systems are going to have to be completely redone to fit that monetization model if you change it at that point, at the 50% done. And that's going to be either a tremendous amount of work, probably redoing 30% of the game that you are only 50% done with, or it's going to be tacked on and it's going to be really bad in so many ways. And that's the reason why you have to decide your monetization model basically as soon as possible. When I had, Project Triad, now Neon Continuum, the current word of the day, that one, when we got that done, it was originally based off a Triple Triad, which was a, mini game inside of a paid game. It's like, well, how the heck do we model this? It's multiplayer now, and all this, and like when I examined our core gameplay loop, the only thing that made sense to do with it is free to play, and I really did not want to do free to play. I really detest a lot of those models and whatnot. So I was like, if I'm going to do free to play, I'm going to do a free to play that is consumer friendly and breaks the mold. But I know that people who have in the past made completely consumer friendly free to play games and have failed horribly at it.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I knew that there was key aspects in the design where I couldn't go completely consumer friendly. And I have to be on this grayscale of consumer friendliness that is mostly consumer friendly, probably about 95%, but not 100%, because if I were to go any farther, I would be killing the game because of just the market and how consumers are used to engaging with this market. And that's the big challenge of when you create your own monetization model, and it's a huge undertaking. So like, when and if I did not decide this from the very beginning, right after I got my core gameplay loop, everything would have been a train wreck.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And again, these are questions that they have to be answered as early in the design process as you can, because changing them is basically it's like basically rebuilding a boat while you're already out to sea. And when that happens, things are going to start to get messed up. And we've spoken many times about the death by 1,000 cuts issue when it comes to game design. That if one thing goes wrong, most likely it's going to drive something else to go wrong, and that's going to drive something else. There was a post-mortem that I was reading on Gamma Sutra for a developer of it was like a visual novel style game, and just reading the things that they point out were their issues. These are things that for somebody who understands design, we can spot this within milliseconds. Like they were saying, maybe we should have started to play visual novel games before we try to build one. And I think that gave Shark an aneurysm when he read that.
Yeah, it did.
And
yeah, you definitely want to properly research. This is something we didn't write down, but this is definitely something that you absolutely have to do. This is before your core gameplay loop even. You have to properly research your genre. And when I say genre, I mean multiple genres, because I mean your genre of gameplay as well as your genre of theme that you apply to the game. We're talking about like whether it's a platformer or platformer rather, whether it's an RPG, card game, CCG, roguelike, whatever it is, you need to examine that and research that. As well as if you're going with like cyberpunk or, sci-fi or, dinosaurs, sharks, whatever you're going with theme-wise, you need to also research and examine that genre.
Yep, and this is also, and to Rat's Tail's comment, yeah, sure, I can take a look at it at some point. But this is also why when you combine genres, this is kind of expert level gameplay, or expert level design. Because you need to be able to understand what two different genres did right and wrong, and somehow fit those two together. This is why for a lot of people who say, oh, let's just make, roguelike cooking sim, or visual novel racing, or whatever, that these games often ending up being less than the sum of their parts. Because if you only try to make one of those two genres work, it usually leads to both of them not working. Because you're trying to build one cohesive core gameplay loop out of two completely different systems. It will be like trying to build an airplane out of, boat parts.
Yeah, and I have tons of ideas of games I want to make that are on my back burner that combine multiple genres. But I do not touch those because I am afraid myself. I am afraid of doing that. I think I could pull it off. I definitely do think I could pull it off. But what if I can't? And that's what I'm afraid of. And
Yeah.
I want to get more experience under my belt before I attempt doing a multi-genre game. I need to have a I need to have the studio doing well, paying every staff I need to pay before I remotely think about taking that risk. And because it is so risky, because that is where it's almost doubling the risk. It's almost doubling the bullets in the chamber of your gun, of your Russian roulette, to whether your game is going to be successful or not when you combine genres. And you really, really have to be careful with that. And you really need, I think, a successful game. And when I say a successful game, I mean one that allows you to pay yourself $20+ an hour for, the next, probably 6 years, 2 games, and everybody that you need to work on that current game for at least 3 years, bare minimum, and have some money left over to pay somebody for the next game. And I there's no way to zero out the bullets in the chamber. There's no way to zero that out because luck is always in the chambers. You can never get rid of luck.
Yeah. But I think with that, let me check our list here. So we talked about kind of figure out what your monetization model is. And monetization model is definitely going to be more, I think, as we see more developers try to embrace live service or post-release support, that it is going to become a factor. And that, I think, we didn't really put this on our list, but I think it's very important to clarify this. That in today's market, a lot of consumers are expecting post-release support. And it is something you need to nail down very early into your development as to what is your game going to look like 6 months after release, 5 years after release. For some games, it is literally the same game it was at launch. For other games, it may not be that case. And it's important to have that game plan. Because one of the worst things you can do is release your game, people say, we want more, we gotta have more to it, and you have no ideas, and your entire momentum just dovetails at that point.
Yeah. I do want to clarify to Board Fan in chat, we're not referring to the player's luck, how much a game is dependent on the player's luck. We're talking about the luck of dealing with the market and succeeding a game. You put a game out there, you could do everything right. You could go through our checklist and get everything right and get the details of everything since we're just doing an overview. But you get it all right, and you're still not going to be taking all the bullets out of the chamber. It's risk mitigation, which is removing risk, but you can never 100% remove the risk. So therefore, it always will luck will always be a factor to if your game is going to succeed. And part of that luck is timing. If we see many people work on a space game, and at that time there was no space games, and then by the time they finished that game, the Steam marketplace was flooded with space games, and they released that game, and it would have probably succeeded wildly when they first was working on it, but now, no. People are just saying not another space game and shoving it off. So timing is part of that luck.
Yeah, and even if your game is different from everybody else as well, if you come out at the wrong time, or let's say there are no space games, but you decide to release your game the same week Call of Duty and Battlefield are released, and nobody wants to talk about your little space game, especially not YouTubers and streamers. They want to talk about Call of Duty. Well, guess what? Good luck getting people to even notice your game. And
Or when you plan your release, you know, 3 months in advance, and Steam has, Steam was normally good about notifying you when there's going to be a sale 3+ months in advance. And of course, the dates would be leaked that very day, and then one day, Steam's like, you know what? We're not going to tell them about the Steam sale until the day before the Steam sale comes out. And to people who have, I'm speaking of my last game. I had delayed my last game 3 times or 3 times, and I told them that this date is hard. We will not be changing it. And that happens to be the one time that Steam does not tell us when a Steam sale is coming out until the day before. And then my game releases 1 week after the Steam sale when nobody's got any money. So we get tons of wish list, and not a single person on the wish list buys a copy.
Yep,
and it sent the game completely into failure. There's other aspects to that too, but that was a big factor of luck that played very, very hard against us. And
and it's something that for a lot of the developers you're not thinking about. But these are all these factors that will come back to either help your game or utterly sink it. And again, there are a lot of things you can't control. You don't know what somebody else is working on unless they're actually publicizing it. But there are things that you need to know. You need to be able to read the market. That's why last week we talked about understanding the market as part 1 of the series. Because if everyone is sick and tired of, let's say, Cyberpunk, or sick and tired of roguelikes, or whatever, maybe you should put your Cyberpunk roguelike style game on hold for a little bit. Maybe you can work on another idea. But
which that's exactly what I'm afraid of. Is people getting sick of Cyberpunk when I'm working on a Cyberpunk / sci-fi game. And it's like, I've got to get this game out before that happens, and I'm having so much trouble getting that going, and it's honestly scary because I can see that luck. I can see that luck coming on like a train, or a truck, and I'm standing in the headlights of it, and it's, can I get out of the way before that truck just plows me over?
Yep, and it is very tough. Again, this is why the whole point is about mitigating these risk factors. Because if you are big enough, if you do a great enough job when it comes to all this stuff, you can kind of take those extra hits and they won't matter. Like, if you get a massive market... Yeah, at least sometimes. Like, again, there's a reason why some games do well even though they have horrible store pages. Because they did an amazing job of marketing. If you get your game in front of
outside of the store page.
Yep. Like a game like Among Us. Or, again, that could be an outlier. But if a game does really beautifully, it resonates with everyone, guess what? At that point, you could just stop marketing the game on your side. Everything else has been taken care of for you. But again, those are extreme circumstances. The chance that anyone's watching this, again, that it's going to happen to them is very low. That is, again, lottery winning luck.
And getting struck by lightning 3 times on the way there and 3 times on the way back.
Yeah, and to Rat's Tail's point, yeah, and I'm hearing a lot of things about the tabletop industry right now as another good point about how, these events can factor in that with shipping charges going through the roof because of COVID and that whole situation with the ship getting stuck last year, that it's
with all the memes.
What was that?
With all the memes on it.
Yeah, that's going to lead to incredibly high costs when it comes to shipping freight. Which, if you're making a physical game, that's a very big deal. You're trying to get your product from another country, and
not to mention if you're doing a physical play game, right at the start of Corona,
Yeah. I remember when I spoke to a developer who did a tabletop game, and he decided to do his shipping right when China was celebrating. I think it was like the Year of the Rat or whatever Chinese New Year was, and they shut down for like 3 months. Like, if you're a game developer and you're told people that your game's going to be available in a month and a half, and nobody's doing production for the next 3 months, guess what? Your game
You're
is
in
not
trouble.
coming out in the next month and a half.
And you're in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And this is why research is such a big deal about this. But I think we've kind of
And
like
luck.
hammered that point home. So on our list, let's talk a little bit more about aesthetics, because
We hadn't got to a couple of things on the
okay,
list, and that was a single player versus multiplayer and solo versus team.
okay,
So, single player versus multiplayer, you need to determine again right at the beginning when you're getting your core gameplay loop done. Is this going to be a single player game or is this going to be a multiplayer game? And as a indie, let me tell you, multiplayer is pretty much a no-no. It
it is
is,
very risky.
yeah, it's very risky. And I'm doing multiplayer on my game because that's my only choice. And I, in so many ways wish I hadn't, but like can't go back and, hindsight's 2020. But like single player versus multiplayer, single player is so much easier to do. I mean, when you're dealing with a multiplayer game, you have to deal with having enough players seated in your community to actually, have when you release the game, people are actually there to play it. Because like if they have to wait 2 hours for somebody to show up to play it
They
in
wait 5
matchmaking,
minutes to show up, like
yeah,
five or even 1 minute. That's a bad sign. And
yeah, and to just to get down to the 1 minute, and we're talking about 1 minute averages, not 1 minute, as the maximum wait time, but 1 minute as an average. That means seeding your community with 3,000 players before your game has released on day one. So we're talking about day -1, day -40, day -200. You need to have 3,000 players there ready to play your game on day one.
if you
And
don't,
that is so hard.
yep.
And that's the reason why multiplayer is such a red flag. And then people are like, why not just do multiplayer and single player? And it's like,
Well,
well, you
yes.
just took your problem and made it worse.
Yep,
Because now, not only do you have to have all those players for multiplayer, but now you have to eliminate the ones that actually want to play single player. And now you have to fill your 3,000 back up. And then if there's any of those that want to play single player, then you have to eliminate those. And then you have to refill it and then eliminate and keep on doing that until you have 3,000 that actually legitimately want to play
And
multiplayer. And at which point you have like seeded your community with like 6, 9, 12, 18, 40,000 people. So you just made your job so much harder.
yep, and for publishers out there, I think they're starting to take notice of this, because multiplayer has high reward value. There's a reason why people are looking at mobile games, why they're looking at Fortnite, Among Us, and so on. Because when those games succeed, they sell like gangbusters. But it's that very much the World of Warcraft problem. That, yes, World of Warcraft did amazingly well, so let me try and make the next World of Warcraft. I can do that, right? It doesn't work like that. And if you are planning for multiplayer, you not only have to design the game, you have to build a netcode. Because I think one of the things that we're seeing is that remote play, while it is a really great feature, you can't build your entire multiplayer architecture around remote play. Because you're technically not building an architecture. You are hoping and pleading that people have good internet connections and that they can play your game like that. But the problem, and yeah, netcode really does suck, as Radstail is pointing out there.
And to Tommy's point about, you could build it single player at launch and then enable multiplayer later on. Yes, but also no. Here's the thing: is you have to build multiplayer from day one. So if you're building multiplayer for day one and then just turn it off, that will technically work, but your game may die before you turn it on. So like it's maybe just a whole lot of wasted work. At the same time, you could build the multiplayer and turn the single player on later, and that, as long as your community is big enough on your multiplayer before you turn your single player on, that is guaranteed to work. But the single player doesn't have to just be turned on. You can just develop the multiplayer, and then after the multiplayer is developed, then you could develop the single player and put it on. You can't just develop the multiplayer later. You can develop the single player later, but the multiplayer is the most risky. So you're leading with your hardest foot forward, and it just becomes it's a whole mess. But like the I think the real decision making is what makes your game the best. Is your game better as a single player game? Is it better as a multiplayer game? If it's better as a multiplayer game, then probably leading with a multiplayer is the best aspect. It's not the easiest, it's not the most likely to succeed, but it is quote unquote the best because it's the best gameplay experience, and that's what I had with mine. Now a lot of people have asked for single player stuff, and I was never really interested in it, but like I've talked about putting a single player mode in there afterwards if the consumer base is so high, but I'm pretty sure that once the game is together and everybody's playing it, I don't think very many people will be concerned about a single player game, because I think a lot of the concerns about the single player was, what if there's not enough players? What if the game dies? And I already have contingencies for that, to where, we can downsize to a very small server that only costs $5 a month or $10 a month or something like that. And if we cannot collect $10 worth of donations in that time period, then nobody cares if the game is alive, and it doesn't hurt to shut it down.
Yep,
so, yeah.
And it is very tricky when you're trying to decide these points, because a developer, I don't want to name them here, but they got, in case they're watching, they want to say it's fine, go for it. But they got in touch with me about a game that they originally started as multiplayer, but they couldn't find a publisher willing to shoulder that risk. So they're transitioning into a single player game. And it could turn out that this game could be an amazing multiplayer experience. But multiplayer kind of magnifies the risks, especially in today's market, that you need to consider. And from single player versus, and like to Pony's point,
yeah,
that we've seen developers who release a really great single player game, and then everyone's like, well, I want to play multiplayer. I want multiplayer. And some cases that could be beneficial, but more often than not, if you just focus, 80% of your time on making a single player game, trying to then just retrofit multiplayer on top of that is not going to work out well for you. Especially, again, if you've never even thought about netcode or thought about how the multiplayer architecture is going to work. Because, like I said, remote
multiplayer is so easy to implement when it's the very first thing you implement, and it's next to impossible to implement when it's the last thing you implement.
And here's an example of this. That Full Metal Furies game that we played, this was, I think, like 2-3 years ago, is a really great game. I enjoyed it. Everyone we were playing with really liked that game. But guess what? When it was first released, it was a multiplayer game that had no online architecture. You could only play it peer-to-peer. And guess what? most people didn't play that peer to peer. They wanted to play with an easy lobby system because that's the standard of what people expect these days. And the game crashed hard for the studio. Cellar Door, it basically I think was a reason why they went back to make Rogue Legacy 2, because they were in very bad straits with Full Metal Furies. So they did eventually release a lobby mode for it. But this was, I think, like, I want to say like 6 months, maybe a year after the original release. And that is like 3 lifetimes, in terms of, a video game's lifespan, in terms of how long that took. But again, the point is, multiplayer is one of those things that you either have to go all in on, or don't do a damn thing at all with it. Because if you try and half-ass it, you're going to piss everybody off. And a pissed off community is not going to be around when you're trying to find people to play with.
But multiplayer can be easy when you're starting out. It can be very easy. I've had multiple programmers start over on my current game, code-wise, and pretty much all of them implemented the multiplayer in the first 24 to 36 hours. Because all it requires is you look up on the internet multiplayer assets. There's tons of them free out there that are really, really good. You find one of them, you get it, you import it, and then you configure it, you get things working. Takes 24 to 36 hours, and you have multiplayer online. You can go into a match and have a couple boxes. One player moving one box, one player moving the other box, and it's super easy. Takes like an hour. It takes like a day, kind of thing. And then you build everything on top of that. But if you do that as a last thing, then
you're in very big trouble.
Yeah. When you do it as the last thing, it means you're doing it as the first thing for the second time, and you're developing a new game. Essentially, what it means.
And then you have to do it all over again.
Yeah.
And again, like, we've seen developers. Wait, who just said that? Rat's Tail pointing out... Oh, no, wait. Pony mentioning Silksong as a very interesting point. There are modders who have multiplayer modes for Hollow Knight. And I don't know how popular they are, but there are people who play that. You can almost turn anything into a multiplayer experience. But there's a far cry of a difference between modders and, people making something, just to experiment with, and basing or risking your entire game's development on multiplayer. What we saw with Doom Eternal is a really good example. Doom Eternal may be a very fantastic single-player shooter, but guess what? Very few people play that battle mode. And I can tell you that's not hyperbole. I think it's like less than 10% of the player base got any of those battle mode achievements. So
if Doom can't do it, that means pretty much nobody should be running both single and multiplayer.
Especially, again, if your franchise is built on single player. And again, that's another point about reading the market.
Franchise is built on multiplayer.
And again, there are outliers. Ultimate Chicken Horse is a multiplayer platformer game. There really aren't a lot of those in like the grand scheme of the genre. But it worked for them because they found something. They found that very specific niche, and they hammered it home. But
do they have a single player mode?
I don't know, to be honest with you.
I don't think they. I'm pretty positive they don't.
And again, this just comes with everything that we've said about reading the market. But conversely, there could be a reason why people don't do X. And you have to be able to study that, because we've played games that tried that. What if we made a platformer when the player can't jump properly? Surely it'll be this, utter amazing art experience. No, people just don't want to play a platform with bad controls.
Yeah.
But
I mean, some streamers do as rage bait,
mhm.
but
But
outside of rage bait, no.
as a quick time point, we are over an hour and 20 in. So there is, I think, no chance we're going to hit this entire list this week. Now,
No.
we do have at least, how you separate at least like 4 more topics. Do you want to get into them tonight? Or do you want to, move them into a part 2?
Why don't we get into the first one,
Mm-hmm.
and then we'll move the other 3 into since we've already talked a lot about it,
Mm-hmm.
and then leave the other 3 for next cast.
Yeah. This also means I'll need to come with another Tony Robinson thumbnail for next week. Maybe I can have him fighting Sekiro. There we go. Hey, I just figured it out within a minute.
There we go.
But let's talk about the importance of art. Because this is another thing you need to figure out relatively early into your game. Or, I'm sorry, more specifically, aesthetics. Because there is a difference between art and aesthetics. Art is the graphics...
Or art aesthetics.
Yeah. Art is the graphical power or the graphical style you're going to put into your game. Aesthetics is the experience or emotion you're trying to put into your game. Whether that is retro-minded, cel-shaded, billboard, super highly realistic that you can see every individual hair on somebody's arm. Whatever it is, this is something that, just like your core gameplay loop, it's going to resonate and affect all aspects of your game.
Well, I would say aesthetics is more style. And art is just I guess the doing graphics of some kind. It doesn't matter what kind it is.
Yeah.
So when we talk about art aesthetics, we're talking about some type of art, whether it's 3D, 2D, pixel art, whatever kind of thing. And we're talking about the style to it. So the key to art aesthetics is not how much work it takes to put it in, not how much it costs to make, not how much it takes to actually make the thing. What the key point of it is that it looks amazing. And now you can have a game with nothing but squares, triangles, and circles and whatnot look amazing. We've seen that in Just Shapes and Beats.
Mm-hmm. Or you could just have...
We have seen the exact same thing with squares, circles, and triangles look like complete shit in probably about 5,000 games on Steam. Yeah. And that is the difference between not style and not having style.
Yeah. And to everyone's comment, again, aesthetics is the sum total of everything about kind of the visual or emotional aspect of the game. So aesthetics touch the art, they touch the music, they touch the graphical style of it. While just graphics, again, that's just what somebody's visually looking at.
And when we talk about graphical horsepower, we're talking about how much time,
depth,
effort, and high rendering are we doing, to actually put this on screen,
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitions are certainly a pain, I know, rats. Yep. And again, like Dusk, that's another really good example. Dusk is a game that graphically doesn't look all that appealing. You put that next to Doom, or next to Prey, or any first-person based game that came in the last 5 years, it's not going to look graphics-wise. But it nails that retro aesthetic. Oh, congratulations there, Chris. And that retro aesthetic is another big point. There is a huge difference between good and bad retro. You look at, again, like when people copy, 8-bit, 16-bit games, that they'll just make their game look like an LJN game, or, Jaws or Nightmare on Elm Street. Well,
And those were really bad art back in the day. They're really bad art today.
and there's a reason why, Mario's still timeless. That Nintendo games, they age really damn well because they nailed that aesthetic. Yes, Mario may not be as high def in, Super Mario Galaxy than he is in Odyssey, but it still
Style is
holds
there.
up. Yep.
Yeah. That's the thing about you see about style. Is
Mm-hmm.
style never ages. You can look back at old video games like Mario and you can look at the old Sonic, Sonic 1, and they look great. Now you look back at the old Call of Duty, that looks like garbage.
You
You
mean
look
gray
back
garbage.
at
Mm-hmm. And
yeah, you look at when they focused on graphical horsepower and not art aesthetics, they don't hold up after a few years, even
and
after 6 months. But
and
when you focus on art aesthetics, it can hold up forever.
and let's be straight with everyone. It's hard to get good aesthetics in a game. Like, it is a lot harder to do good aesthetics than it is good to do good graphical horsepower.
Although graphical horsepower,
Will help, or help if you have a good team behind you.
it also is generally really expensive and takes a lot of time.
Yep, and I need to kind of this is another one of those hills I'm gonna have to probably die on when it comes to retro games. That making a retro game with blurry pixels is not making a classic retro game. Because I've seen developers, they will argue until their face turns red, saying, "Oh, all old NES games were blurry, and that's just how games look back then." No, it is not, and please stop trying to do that.
Yeah, I hate that. And here's another aspect with today's market
Mm-hmm.
is even if you made your game look like a good pixel art game from the age,
1989, yeah.
if you were to make it look like a good Mario game,
Mm-hmm.
that in today's market will identify you as definitely an 8-bit game. But the fact is we've seen that before. We've seen that tons of times, and it's not graphically appealing enough. It's not high enough level for the art value of the market. So you have to exceed what has come before you, and that is hard. And that's kind of what my point was with Rat's Tales earlier, is that, his met the old terms in a lot of ways. He may have exceeded it in a couple ways, but he didn't exceed it enough to be good in the current market. And so, like, just being slightly better than the old doesn't put you in market success. You have to be significantly better. And that is the problem with the graphics war, and that's the market. And it's bad, and that's the reason why I said you were on the bottom tier. The bottom tier doesn't mean you did worse than the old games. It means you did equal or slightly better. But equal or slightly better puts you on the very, very bottom tier for the current market, which
And
again really sucks.
there's a difference between failing because you did something wrong and failing because people around you did something better. And that's important to clarify because there are a lot of games that have really solid aesthetics, but if they're in a market where the top dog of that genre is, up here and maybe you're right here, your game is not going to stand out. It's the Fortnite PUBG situation all over again. That PUBG came first. It is the first, very big battle royale game. But Fortnite went above and beyond. They went so far above and beyond that they captured that market away from PUBG.
Which is so hard to do. It's basically a near impossibility. But they did it because they were so much far and beyond. And when somebody so much far and beyond comes out before you do, and then you don't at least match them or at least come close to them, you stand very little chance. And that's kind of where I'm getting to with you, Red Stout, and it's not bad looking art. It's good looking art, but it's not good enough to compete against the top dogs. And it's a hard fight, I'm fighting myself. Every developer right now that knows what they're doing is fighting it. And the ones that don't know what they're doing is either losing at it or somehow magically succeeding at it without knowing that they're fighting a battle.
Yeah, and to give you guys an example of just how much aesthetics matter, one of the best examples of this is Team Fortress 2. When Valve originally worked on Team Fortress 2 and they started development of it, it was very much in the same kind of pixel, very military style of what Half-Life did. And again, Team Fortress started out simply as a mod for Half-Life. But during development, they realized that if they wanted this game to stand out, they needed to make it do something different. And what they decided to do was completely change the aesthetics of it. And that aesthetic change turned into more of like that kind of pop art, kind of like retro 50s, 60s kind of vibe to it. And guess what? That change not only affected how it looked, it also made them start looking at these characters and say, let's give them personalities. And the whole, Meet the Team video series gave birth to that. And then guess what? That aesthetics resonated with people, so they decided to start doing fan art and start coming up with their own cosmetics, which led to the whole Manco store. And then that led to the whole, Machinima movie contests. And all of that was given birth because they wanted to do something different with their aesthetics. And like Pony said, Team Fortress 2 holds up. It is still a game. Yeah, exactly. It is a game that it is 2021. Team Fortress 2 was released officially 2007. That is, 14 years ago. And it still holds up. You look at Call of Duty or any military-themed shooter that came out either around that time or after, it probably doesn't hold up.
Yeah. And that's... Style holds up. Graphical horsepower does not. And... I think that if you're releasing a game in today's market, you need to be aiming for style over graphical horsepower. Again, style can make random geometric shapes look really good in Just Shapes and Beats. Look up the game if you don't know it. One of my friends made it, and it's a great game. It has its issues certainly, but the art is really good, even though they just went with geometric shapes, which is so much of a red flag. If you heard a game that was going to be just geometrical shapes, what would you think?
Very basic, something not worth looking at.
Yeah.
And
it is very basic, but it is very much worth looking at because they added so much style to it, so much art aesthetics to those basic shapes.
And there's something that we also need to say. When you do aesthetics right, much like UI UX, it doesn't look like a lot of work actually went into the game. When we play games like that Garden Story, like Team Fortress, like any other game that really comes together, it oftentimes looks like the developer, it all just went through, just check off the box, do 1, 2, 3, the game is done. But it takes a lot of work to make your game look that streamlined, to make it look that good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the style is what achieves the uniqueness there, Tommy, and not the graphical horsepower. That doesn't say that you cannot have both graphical horsepower. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
well, you definitely have graphical horsepower in any case. It's just what level of graphical horsepower. But that does not mean that you can't have high graphical horsepower and high graphical art aesthetics. And we see that in like the original, Valkyria Chronicles,
Mm-hmm.
because that game has so much style and art aesthetics to it. It's amazing, and they went for the highest level of graphical horsepower that they could back in that day. What was that? Early PlayStation 2, or was that late PlayStation 1?
Well, Valkyria Chronicles,
The one, the
that
first.
I think was PlayStation 3.
Was it the first one?
Maybe. Let me see. Valkyria Chronicles 1. That was PlayStation 3 in 2008.
So it was super early PlayStation 3
Mm-hmm.
before they fully unlocked the power of it. But like, you will get most early PlayStation 3 games, and they do not look good today. But that game looks so good today. And the fourth addition to it, with going again for high graphical horsepower, it doesn't look that much better than the first one. And that's how much style plays into it rather than graphical horsepower. Because while the graphical horsepower that they've increased from early PlayStation 3 to PlayStation 5 now, or was the fourth one on PlayStation 4? Late play
Mm.
I don't know if it was late 4 or early 5 or both.
Mm-hmm.
But the increase in graphical horsepower is a significant increase. But like, the difference that it makes in the overall visuals of the game,
Mm-hmm.
very minimum, because style is the key. The art aesthetics is the key, and that's what keeps the old one looking fresh, and what will keep the new one looking fresh for many years to come. Where things like Call of Duty go all graphical horsepower, no art aesthetics, and those things look bad after 6 months, if that
Mm-hmm.
long, and
And it's
you know
also a chase as well. That you're just constantly trying to one up somebody in terms of graphical horsepower, which leads to more money having to be spent on it.
mhm. And it is a graphical war, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're experiencing in the games industry. And the market demands it, because if you do not participate in the graphical war, through either horsepower or art aesthetics,
You need one or the
then
other.
then then or both.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't do at least one of them, and you're not competing in the war, then your game is pretty much dead.
Yep.
It's dead. And you really have to pay attention. And the easiest way to do this, the cheapest way to do it for indie studio, is through art aesthetics rather than graphical horsepower. And again, graphical horsepower is just temporary. You want your game to look good now and look like shit in 6 months, or do you want your good game to look good forever?
Yep.
If you want it
But
forever, then art aesthetics.
but of course, it's going to take time to develop that aesthetic, because the thing is, it's not just you coming up with, hey, we're going to use cell shaded art, put in, hit the cell shade button on Unity and you're done. When
Yeah,
we talk
that's not.
about aesthetics, that is not just how your game looks. That's also how it sounds. That's how the UI is going to be displayed. If you're going to do like very beautiful, let's say pixel art aesthetic for your entire game, you don't want your UI to be, bare black rectangles with white text in the middle of them.
Yeah. And what you're just hitting on is just the very, very surface level, not even, tip of the iceberg, where like 99% of the ice is underwater kind of thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
a big part of it is your colors, your color palette, whatever you do for colors, because colors affects many things. Colors affect the mood. They affect contrast. If your contrast is not right, then your art fails.
Hmm.
If your mood is wrong, like say you're making a game, that's happy go lucky, and the whole thing's black and white. Yeah, it's not going to work. But if you're making a game that's all depressing and everything, and you make it these bright, vivid colors with like
Hmm.
looks like Sonic art kind of thing, that's not going to work either. And you have to really like get it. And like the problem is when you have themes that cross both
Hmm.
sides. When you have like my last game, Chromasia, the old word of the day, when it had a story that was very, very serious and very,
Hmm.
very harsh at the same time, is full of outrageous comedic moments kind of thing. Think of it as like a war story, where a lot of people die, but then there's one comic relief character that's odd, constantly
Hmm.
making you roll laughing kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's
And,
like when you have that kind of thing, where do you go with on your colors? Do you go with the bright and cheery? Do you go with the depressing? Do you go somewhere in the middle? What do
hmm.
you do? And that's something I'm still personally trying to figure out because
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to it.
Yep.
But
And
like it is so hard to get that right a lot of times.
hmm. And another point somebody will argue, and they'll say, "Well, we're going to mismatch it on purpose. It's going to stand out. It's going to be super cuddly graphics, but AO graded story and gruesome visuals and stuff like that." And
And that thing almost never works out. And I say almost never because it depends on how you do it. You can make it work, but 99.9% of the time, probably higher than that, it will absolutely destroy your game. The an example of that does work, can work, is Happy Tree Friends.
mm,
You know, but they did so much stuff to perfectly adapt it to that. And if you do not get it to perfection to the same level they did, you stand no chance. And
yep.
see, part of what they did, just looking at this at the surface level, is Happy Tree Friends has a very muted color palette. All the characters are very, very light pastel. They
Hmm.
look colorful, but they aren't. They have the color, but they're very desaturated in the color, and they're not using the highly saturated colors like Sonic would, or a lot of different other things. And so like they're not 100% in that happy cheery thing. They have more happy cheery character designs with very desaturated colors that are going towards that darkness. And you can't just completely go off track kind of thing. And it's they're not that brightly saturated. Let me look at this. Go on, Josh, while I look this up.
Yeah, and you can do a lot. Again, like you can make this work, but it takes a lot more to get to that point. We can even talk about games like, all the Five Nights at Freddy's clones, and even Five Nights at Freddy's itself, that went with, happy go lucky characters, very like basic, like FMV almost style graphics. Or I'm sorry, very basic CGI graphics. And it resonated with people. But you have to be able to understand again how these different styles mesh together, and that takes a very talented artist to do it.
Yeah, looking at this art now for Happy Tree Friends, I was right. The characters are desaturated. They're not like at the bottom of the saturation levels. They're like mid to low. But what they do is they use very high saturation for blood, brains, and such like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, something that really grabs the eye, kind of thing. They use the high saturation for that, but they use fairly low saturation for the actual colors. Not like super low, but fairly low.
Mm-hmm.
But they use high contrasting colors within that you can read many different colors against each other.
Mm-hmm.
And they're also, you know, going with symbol palettes on the color characters where they only have like one or two colors on them generally, so that each color really stands out from each other, and it gives that appearance of bright and cheery, even though it's not. But the definitely the blood, guts, and brains and all that stuff is definitely in the happy cheery area with the high
Mm-hmm.
contrast or
Yeah.
high saturation.
Yeah. And once you kind of settle on your aesthetic, you have to go all in on it. But you also have to be careful about not making everything look too similar. Because we can talk about a lot of games that try to rip off Dark Souls. And, Moody Gray is the only thing that we see for 20 to 30 hours of play. That was kind of one of the issues that Mortal Shell ran into, that it just has this very homogenous look to it. And you can have a unified aesthetic, but you can push it in different directions. In Dark Souls, there's a difference between being in Blighttown versus being in Undeadburg and being in Annalundo and so on.
Yeah.
But
Keep on going. I'm writing down this topic that Chris brought up an idea for.
but I think we should probably wrap things up because we've definitely gone over our time. I guess I'm trying to think if there's anything else regarding aesthetics that we didn't mention. Beeper minute shooter. Um, and yet again, the graphical horsepower of a game may impact the aesthetic to some extent, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to the talent of the artists. If you remember, we played that pixel horror game House like last year. It is a game that has a very basic look to it, but yeah, the other areas did, but it's just getting out of that opening area that I think a lot of people really got tired with in Mortal Shell. But with House, yes, it is very basic pixel art, but it has some very disturbing animations and art design of those characters. And that helps it stand out compared to other pixel driven games. Pixel art in particular is, again, an example of just how huge of a spectrum there is between, LJN on this side, Owlboy over on this side.
Yeah. And there's even more beautiful stuff than Owlboy now.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, we had the Star Renegades and a bunch of others. Of course, Star Renegades while it was pixel art, it wasn't completely 2D. It was 2.5D. But it was still 100% pixel art. But and when you mix styles where you mix 3D and 2D and pixel art and 2D and all this other
Mm-hmm.
stuff, when you mix those, you have to be extremely careful because that is very much red flag territory. So you better be careful. And that's exactly what I'm doing in my current game. I'm going so deep into the red flags on it, it's crazy, but it's working out because we're using 3D, we're using 2D,
Mm-hmm.
and we're using pixel art. And those three things are very, very hard to mesh well together,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm doing all these, special techniques that I'm creating myself, although they may have already been created by somebody else and I just didn't know about them, but I'm creating these personally because I'm seeing issues and it's like, how do I fix that issue? Well, let me do this kind of thing. And then that fixes the issue kind of thing. And they may already exist. I'm not claiming to create all these techniques, but I am creating these techniques because
Mm-hmm.
I need them, kind of thing. Because I get feedback to do them, but it is so impossibly hard to when you mix, 2D pixel art, 3D, or any combination of the three. You know, even just mixing two of them. Yeah, I mean, voxel like Minecraft is pixel art plus 3D. It's not 2D though. It's just pixel art in 3D.
All right.
And that look is so hard to pull off. Ask any of the Minecraft clones.
But I think with that, we are hitting 2 hours. I think it's time to wrap things up. And we will be coming back to this for, I guess, part 2 next week. And
probably a part 3 after that. And well, technically this is part 2 because, you know, the second one, the first one had a different, you know, title, but, you know, it was still the, you know, it was still the first part of this series kind of thing. And it's a quote unquote 3-part series, but this middle part is going to be a lot of parts. So, like, you know, this is the first part of the middle part. There will probably be 3 parts to this middle part. So it'll probably be a 5-part series in the end. But this is officially the second part.
Yeah.
If you missed last week's podcast, go check it. And to get the first part of this. And we'll continue the second part next week. And we'll be talking about why marketing matters, you know, branding your company, why store pages are critical, accepting criticism properly, playtesting early, phases of playtesting, and so probably a lot more. Well, depending on how time goes. But, you know, those will be the things we look at going in.
But
the next cast.
But that will take care of things for this week. So for everyone new who's watching, be sure to join the Discord, check out our Patreons. You'll find links to all of our social medias in the descriptions down below.
Yep. And lick the smash button and smash the like button on both of our channels. Again, links are down below. And come back for the next one.
If you want to catch it live, it will be Sunday starting at 4 p.m. ET. And if you want to catch our show in the Inquiries, where we review indie game Steam store pages, we're going to be doing those Mondays at 4 p.m. ET. And we're always looking for submissions for them.
Although it won't be this Monday.
The 23rd. No, it won't.
Yeah.
But with that said, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, everybody, take care.